and welcome to Let's Read. Today's Let's Read is Building a New Society Rid of Social Injustice and Imperialist Domination by Thomas Sankara. People of Upper Volta, comrade militants of the Revolution. In the course of this year, 1983, our country has gone through some particularly intense moments, whose impact still remains indelibly stamped on the minds of many of our fellow citizens. During this period, the struggle of the voltaic people has experienced ebbs and flows. Our people went through the test of heroic struggles and finally triumphed on the now historic night of August the 4th, 1983. The revolution has been irreversibly marching forward in our country now for almost 2 months. 2 months during which the fighting people of Upper Volta have mobilised as one behind the National Council of the Revolution in order to build a new, free, independent and prosperous voltaic society. A new society rid of social injustice and of the age-old domination and exploitation by international imperialism. At the end of the short road travelled thus far, I invite you to take a look back with me, to draw the lessons necessary for accurately assessing the revolutionary tasks that are posed presently and for the near future. By equipping ourselves with a clear view of unfolding events, we strengthen ourselves all the more in our struggle against imperialism and reactionary social forces. To sum up, where have we come from? And where are we going? Those are the questions of the moment that demand a clear, resolute and unequivocal answer from us if we wish to march boldly forward to greater and more resounding victories. The triumph of the August Revolution is due not only to the revolutionary takeover against the sacrosanct reactionary alliance of May the 17th, 1983. It is the result of the voltaic people's struggle against their long-standing enemies. It is a victory over international imperialism and its national allies. A victory over backward, obscurantist and sinister forces. A victory over all the enemies of the people who have plotted and schemed behind their backs. The August Revolution thus came as the solution to the social contradictions that could no longer be suppressed by compromise solutions. The enthusiastic adherence of the broad popular masses to the August Revolution is the concrete expression of the immense hopes that the voltaic people place in the rise of the CNR. They hope that their deep-going aspirations might finally be achieved, aspirations for democracy, liberty, independence, genuine progress, and the restoration of the dignity and grandeur of our homeland, which 23 years of neocolonial rule have treated with singular contempt. The formation of the CNR on August 4th, 1983, and the subsequent establishment of a revolutionary government in Upper Volta opened a glorious page in the annals of the history of our people and our country. However, the legacy bequeathed to us by 23 years of imperialist exploitation and domination is weighty and burdensome. Our task of building a new society cleansed of all the ills keeping our country in a state of poverty and economic and cultural backwardness will be hard and arduous. In 1960, French colonialism, hounded on all sides, defeated at Dien Bien Phu, and grappling with tremendous difficulties in Algeria, drew the lessons of those defeats and was compelled to grant our country its national sovereignty and territorial integrity. This was greeted positively by our people, who had not remained impassive, but rather had been developing appropriate struggles of resistance. This move by French colonial imperialism constituted a victory for the people over the forces of foreign oppression and exploitation. From the popular masses' point of view, it was a democratic reform, whereas from imperialism's point of view, it was merely a transformation of the forms of its domination and exploitation of our people. This transformation nevertheless resulted in a realignment of classes and social layers and the formulation of new classes. In alliance with the backward forces of traditional society, the petty bourgeois intelligentsia of the time, with total contempt for the great masses, who they used as a springboard to power, set about laying the political and economic foundations for the new forms of imperialist domination and exploitation. Fear that the struggle of the popular masses might radicalize and lead to a genuinely revolutionary solution had been the basis for the choice made by imperialism. From that point on, it would maintain its stranglehold over our country and perpetuate the exploitation of our people through the use of voltaic intermediaries. Voltaic nationals were to take over as agents of foreign domination and exploitation. The entire organization of neocolonial society would be nothing more than a simple operation of substituting one form for another. In essence, neocolonial society and colonial society do not differ in the least. Thus, we saw the colonial administration replaced by a neocolonial administration identical to it in every respect. The colonial army was replaced by a neocolonial army with the same characteristics, the same functions, and the same role of safeguarding the interests of imperialism and its national allies. The colonial schools were replaced by neo-colonial schools, which pursued the same goals of alienating the children of our country and reproducing a society fundamentally serving imperialist interests and secondarily serving imperialism's local lackeys and allies. With the support and blessings of imperialism, voltaic nationals set about organising the systematic plunder of our country. With the crumbs of this plunder that fell to them, they were transformed, little by little, into a genuinely parasitic bourgeoisie that no longer knew how to control its voracious appetite. Driven only by their selfish interests, they no longer hesitated at employing the most dishonest means, engaging in massive corruption, embezzlement of public funds and properties, influence peddling and real estate speculation, and practicing favoritism and nepotism. This is what accounts for all the material and financial wealth they've been able to accumulate on the backs of working people. Not satisfied with living off the fabulous incomes they derive from shamelessly employing their ill-gotten wealth, they fight tooth and nail to monopolize political positions that will allow them to use the state apparatus for their own exploitative and wasteful ends. Never do they let a year go by without treating themselves to extravagant vacations abroad. Their children desert the country's schools for prestigious educations in other countries. At the slightest illness, all the resources of the state are mobilized to provide them with expensive care at luxurious hospitals in foreign countries. All this unfolds in full view of the honest, courageous and hard-working voltaic people, mired nonetheless in the most squalid misery. While Upper Volta is a paradise for the wealthy minority, for the majority, the people, it is a barely tolerable hell. As part of this great majority, the wage earners, despite the fact that they are assured a regular income, suffer the constraints and pitfalls of capitalist consumer society. Their entire wage is spent before it has even been received. And this vicious cycle goes on, with no perspective of being broken. Within their respective trade unions, workers join in struggles around demands to improve their living conditions. The breadth of those struggles sometimes compels the neocolonial authorities to grant concessions. But they simply take back with one hand what they give with the other. Thus, a 10% wage increase is announced with great fanfare, only to be immediately taxed, wiping out the expected benefits. After 5, 6, or 7 months, the workers always end up seeing through the swindle and mobilize for new struggles. 7 months is more than enough for the reactionaries in power to catch their breath and advise new schemes. In this never-ending fight, the worker is always the loser. Among this great majority are the peasants, the wretched of the earth, who are expropriated, robbed, mistreated, imprisoned, scoffed at, and humiliated every day, and yet are among those whose labour creates wealth. Thanks to their productive labour, the country's economy stays afloat despite its frailty. It is from their labour that all those voltaics for whom Upper Volta is an Eldorado line in their pockets. And yet, it is the peasants who suffer most from the lack of buildings, of road infrastructure, and from the lack of healthcare facilities and personnel. It is the peasants, creators of the nation's wealth, who suffer most from the lack of schools and school supplies for their children. It is their children who will swell the ranks of the unemployed after a brief stint on the benches in schools that are poorly adapted to the realities of this country. It is among the peasants that the illiteracy rate is the highest, 98%. Those who most need to learn in order to improve the output of their productive labour are again the ones who benefit the least from investments in healthcare, education and technology. The peasant youth, who have the same attitudes as all young people, that is, greater sensitivity to social injustice and a desire for progress, end up rebelling, and they desert the countryside, thus depriving it of its most dynamic elements. These youth's initial impulse drives them to the large urban centres, Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. There they hope to find better paying jobs and enjoy too the advantages of progress. The lack of jobs drives them to idleness with all its characteristic vices. Finally, so as to not end up in prison, they seek salvation by going abroad, where the most shameless humiliation and exploitation await them. But does voltaic society leave them any other choice? Stated as succinctly as possible, such is the situation of our country after 23 years of neocolonialism, a paradise for some and a hell for the rest. After 23 years of imperialist domination and exploitation, our country remains a backward agricultural country, where the rural sector, employing 90% of the workforce, accounts for only 45% of the gross domestic product, and supplies 95% of the country's total exports. More simply, it should be noted that in other countries, farmers constituting less than 5% of the population manage not only to feed themselves adequately and satisfy the basic needs of the entire nation, but also to export enormous quantities of their agricultural produce. Here, however, more than 90% of the population, despite strenuous exertions, experiences famine and deprivation and, along with the rest of the population, is compelled to fall back on imported agricultural products, if not on international aid. The imbalance between exports and imports thus created accentuates the country's dependence on foreign countries. The resulting trade deficit has grown considerably over the years, and the value of our exports covers only around 25% of imports. To state it more clearly, we buy more from abroad than we sell abroad. And an economy that functions on such a basis increasingly goes bankrupt and is headed for catastrophe. Private investments from abroad are not only insufficient, but also constitute a huge drain on the country's economy, and thus do not help strengthen its ability to accumulate wealth. An important portion of the wealth created with the help of foreign investments is siphoned off abroad, instead of being reinvested to increase the country's productive capacity. In the 1973 to 79 period, it's estimated that 1.7 billion CFA francs left the country each year as income from direct foreign investments, while new investments came to only an average of 1.3 billion CFA francs a year. The insufficient level of productive investments has led the voltaic state to play a fundamental role in the nation's economy through its efforts to compensate for the lack of private investment. This is a difficult situation, considering that the state budgeted income basically consists of tax revenues, which represent 85% of total revenues and largely come from import duties and taxes. In addition to making national investments, this income finances government spending, 70% of which goes to pay the salaries of civil servants and to ensure the functioning of administrative services. What, then, can possibly be left over for social and cultural investments? In the field of education, our country is among the most backward, with 16.4% of children attending school and an illiteracy rate that reaches 92% on average. This means that of every 100 voltaics, barely 8 know how to read and write in any language. On the level of health, the rate of illness and mortality is among the highest in the sub-region due to the proliferation of communicable diseases and nutritional deficiencies. How can such a catastrophic situation be avoided when we know that our country has only one hospital bed per 1,200 inhabitants and one doctor per 48,000 inhabitants? These few elements alone suffice to illustrate the legacy left to us by 23 years of neocolonialism, 23 years of a policy of total national neglect. No voltaic who loves and honours his country can remain indifferent to this most desperate situation. Indeed, our people, a courageous, hard-working people, have never been able to tolerate such a situation, because they have understood that this was not an inevitable situation, but a question of society being organised on an unjust basis for the sole benefit of a minority. They have therefore waged different types of struggles, searching for the ways and means to put an end to the old order of things. That is why they enthusiastically greeted the National Council of the Revolution and the August Revolution. These constitute the crowning achievement of the efforts they expended and the sacrifices they accepted so as to overthrow the old order, establish a new order capable of rehabilitating voltaic man, and give our country a leading place within the community of free, prosperous and respected nations. The parasitic classes that had always proliferated from colonial and neocolonial Upper Volta are, and will continue to be, hostile to the transformations undertaken by the revolutionary process begun on August 4th, 1983. The reason for this is that they are and remain attached to international imperialism by an umbilical cord. They are and remain fervent defenders of the privileges acquired through their allegiance to imperialism. Regardless of what is done, regardless of what is said, they will remain true to themselves and will continue to plot and scheme in order to reconquer their lost kingdom. Do not expect these nostalgic people to change their mentality and attitude. The only language they respond to and understand is the language of struggle, the revolutionary class struggle against the exploiters and oppressors of the people. For them, our revolution will be the most authoritarian thing that exists. It will be an act by which the people impose their will on them by all the means at their disposal, including arms if necessary. Who are these enemies of the people? They revealed themselves in the eyes of the people during the May 17th events by their viciousness against the revolutionary forces. The people identified these enemies of the people in the heat of revolutionary action. They are, number 1, the voltaic bourgeoisie, which can be broken down by the functions of its various layers into the state bourgeoisie, the comprador bourgeoisie, and the middle bourgeoisie. The state bourgeoisie. This is the layer known by the label political bureaucratic bourgeoisie. This is a bourgeoisie that has enriched itself in an illicit and criminal manner through its political monopoly. It has used the state apparatus just as an industrial capitalist uses his means of production to accumulate surplus value drawn from the exploitation of workers' labour power. This layer of the bourgeoisie will never willingly renounce its former privileges and sit by passively observing the revolutionary transformations underway. The commercial bourgeoisie. This layer, by virtue of its business activity, is tied to imperialism through numerous bonds. For this layer, elimination of imperialist domination means the death of the goose that lays the golden egg. That is why it will oppose the present revolution with all its might. Coming from this category, for example, are the corrupt merchants who seek to starve the people by taking food supplies off the market for purposes of speculation and economic sabotage. The middle bourgeoisie. Although this layer of the voltaic bourgeoisie has ties to imperialism, it competes with the latter for control of the market. But since it is economically weaker, imperialism supplants it. So it has grievances against imperialism. But it also fears the people, and this fear can lead it to make a block with imperialism. Nevertheless, since imperialist domination of our country prevents this layer from playing its real role as a national bourgeoisie, some of its members could, under certain circumstances, be favourable to the revolution, which would objectively place them in the people's camp. However, we must cultivate revolutionary mistrust between the people and individuals like these who come over to the revolution, because all kinds of opportunists will rally to the revolution under this guise. Number 2. The reactionary forces that base their power on the traditional feudal-type structures of our society. In their majority, these forces were able to put up staunch resistance to French colonial imperialism. But ever since our country attained its national sovereignty, they have joined with the reactionary bourgeoisie in oppressing the voltaic people. These forces have put the peasant masses in the position of being a reservoir of votes to be delivered to the highest bidder. In order to safeguard their interests, which they share with imperialism in opposition to those of the people, these reactionary forces most frequently rely on the decaying and declining values of our traditional culture that still endure in rural areas. To the extent that our revolution aims to democratize social relations in the countryside, giving more responsibilities to the peasants, and making more education and knowledge available to them for their own economic and cultural emancipation, these backward forces will oppose it. These are the enemies of the people in the present revolution, enemies that the people themselves identified during the May events. These are the individuals who made up the bulk of the isolated marchers who, protected by a cordon of soldiers, demonstrated their class support for the already moribund regime that had emerged from the reactionary and pro-imperialist coup. The rest of the population, aside from the reactionary and anti-revolutionary classes and social layers enumerated above, is what compromises the voltaic people. A people who consider imperialist domination and exploitation to be an abomination, and who have continually demonstrated this by concrete, daily struggle against the various neocolonial regimes. In the present revolution, the people consist of: Number 1. The voltaic working class, young and few in number, but which, through unremitting struggle against the bosses, has been able to prove that it is a genuinely revolutionary class. In the present revolution, it is a class that has everything to gain and nothing to lose. It has no means of production to lose. It has no piece of property to defend within the framework of the old neocolonial society. It is convinced, however, that the revolution is its business, because it will emerge from it in a stronger position. Number 2. The petty bourgeoisie, which constitutes a vast, very unstable social layer that quite often vacillates between the cause of the popular masses and that of imperialism. In its large majority, it always ends up by taking the side of the popular masses. It includes the most diverse components, including small shopkeepers, petty bourgeois intellectuals, civil servants, college and high school students, private sector employees, etc., and artisans. Number 3. The voltaic peasantry, which in its big majority consists of small peasants who are tied to small plots of land because of the gradual disintegration of collective property forms since the introduction of the capitalist mode of production in our country. Market relations have increasingly dissolved communal bonds and replaced them with private property over the means of production. In the new situation thus created by the penetration of capitalism in our countryside, the voltaic peasant, tied to small-scale production, embodies bourgeois productive relations. Given all these considerations, the voltaic peasantry is an integral part of the category of the petty bourgeoisie. Because of the past and its present situation, the peasantry is the social layer that has paid the highest toll for the imperialist domination and exploitation. The economic and cultural backwardness that characterises our countryside has long kept the peasantry isolated from the great currents of progress and modernisation, relegating it to the role of reservoir for reactionary political parties. Nevertheless, the peasantry has a stake in the revolution and, in terms of numbers, it is its principal force. Number 4. The lumpen proletariat. This is a category of declassed individuals who, since they are without jobs, are prone to hire themselves out to reactionary and counter-revolutionary forces to carry out the latter's dirty work. To the extent that the revolution can provide them something useful to do, they can become its fervent defenders. The revolutions that occur around the world are not at all alike. Each revolution presents original features that distinguish it from others. Our revolution, the August Revolution, is no exception. It takes into account the special features of our country, its level of development, and its subjugation by the world imperialist capitalist system. Our revolution is a revolution that is unfolding in a backward agricultural country where the weight of tradition and ideology emanating from a feudal-type social organisation weighs very heavily on the popular masses. It is a revolution in a country that, because of imperialism's domination and exploitation of our people, has evolved from a colony into a neocolony. It is a revolution occurring in a country still characterised by the lack of an organised working-class consciousness of its historic mission, and which therefore possesses no tradition of revolutionary struggle. It is a revolution occurring in a small country on the continent at a time when, on the international level, the revolutionary movement is coming apart day by day, without any visible hope of seeing a homogeneous bloc arise, capable of giving a stimulus and practical support to nascent revolutionary movements. This set of historical, geographic and sociological circumstances gives a certain specific stamp to our revolution. The August Revolution exhibits a dual character. It is a democratic and a popular revolution. Its primary tasks are to eliminate imperialist domination and exploitation and to purge the countryside of all the social, economic and cultural obstacles that keep it in a backward state. Its democratic character flows from this. It draws its popular character from the full participation of the voltaic masses in the revolution, and their consistent mobilization around democratic and revolutionary slogans that concretely express their own interests in opposition to those of the reactionary classes allied with imperialism. The popular character of the August Revolution also lies in the fact that, in place of the old state machinery, new machinery is being built, capable of guaranteeing the democratic exercise of power by the people and for the people. Our present revolution as characterised above, while being an anti-imperialist revolution, is still unfolding within the framework of the limits of the bourgeois economic and social order. By analysing the social classes of voltaic society, we have put forward the idea that the voltaic bourgeoisie does not constitute a single, homogeneous reactionary and anti-revolutionary mass. Indeed, what characterises the bourgeoisie in underdeveloped countries under capitalist relations is its congenital inability to revolutionise society as the bourgeoisie of the European countries did in the 1780s, that is, at the time when it still constituted a rising class. Such are the characteristics and limitations of the present revolution launched in Upper Volta on the August 4th, 1983. Having a clear view and precise definition of its content guards us against the dangers of deviation and excesses that could be detrimental to the victorious march of the revolution. All those who have taken up the cause of the August Revolution should fix firmly in their minds the guiding principles laid out there. By doing so, they can assume their role as conscious revolutionaries. And, as genuine, bold and tireless propagandists, they can disseminate these principles among the masses. It is no longer enough to call oneself a revolutionary. We also need to be absolutely clear on the profound meaning of the revolution we fervently defend. This is the best way to defend it from the attacks and distortions that the counter-revolutionaries will not fail to use against it. Knowing how to link revolutionary theory to revolutionary practice will be the decisive criteria from now on to distinguish consistent revolutionaries from all those who flock to the revolution under motives that are alien to the revolutionary cause. As we have said, one of the distinctive traits of the August Revolution, and which endows it with its popular character, is that it is a movement of the vast majority for the benefit of the vast majority. It is a revolution made by the voltaic popular masses themselves with their own slogans and aspirations. All of this revolution consists in having the people assume power. That is the reason why the first act of the revolution following the August 4th proclamation was the appeal addressed to the people to create committees for the defence of the revolution. The National Council of the Revolution is convinced that for this revolution to be a genuinely popular revolution, it must proceed to destroy the neocolonial state machinery and organise new machinery capable of guaranteeing popular sovereignty. The question of knowing how this popular power will be exercised, how this power should be organised, is an essential question for the future of our revolution. Until today, the history of our country has essentially been dominated by the exploiting and conservative classes, which have exercised their anti-democratic and anti-popular dictatorship through their stranglehold on politics, the economy, ideology, culture, the administration and the judicial system. The primary goal of the revolution is to transfer power from the hands of the voltaic bourgeoisie allied with imperialism to the hands of the alliance of popular classes that constitute the people. This means that from now on the people who hold power will have to counterpose their democratic and popular power to the anti-democratic, anti-popular dictatorship of the reactionary alliance of social classes that favour imperialism. This democratic and popular power will be the foundation, the solid basis of revolutionary power in Upper Volta. Its chief task will be the total conversion of the entire state machinery with its laws, administration, courts, police and army, which have fashioned to serve and defend the selfish interests of the reactionary social classes and layers. Its task will be to organise the struggle against the counter-revolutionary intrigues seeking to reconquer Paradise Lost, on the road to completely crushing the resistance of the reactionaries who are nostalgic for the past. Therein lies the need and the role of the CDRs as the base of operations for the popular masses as they storm the citadels of reaction and counter-revolution. All the previous political regimes, one after the other, until now, have strived to introduce measures to better run neocolonial society. The changes introduced by these regimes amounted to installing new teams within the continuity of neocolonial power. None of these regimes wished, nor was able to question the socio-economic foundations of voltaic society. That is why they all failed. The August Revolution does not aim to establish one more regime in Upper Volta. It represents a break with all previously known regimes. Its ultimate goal is to build a new voltaic society, within which the voltaic citizen, driven by revolutionary consciousness, will be the architect of his own happiness, a happiness equal to the efforts he will have made. To do this, the revolution, whether the conservative and backward forces like it or not, will be a deep and total upheaval that will spare no domain, no sector of economic, social and cultural activity. Revolutionizing all domains and all sectors of activity is the slogan of the day. Strengthened by the guiding principles laid out here, each citizen should work to revolutionize his sector of activity wherever he finds himself. The philosophy of revolutionary transformations is already affecting the following sectors. Number 1, the national army. Number 2, policies concerning women. And number 3, economic development. Number 1, the national army, its place in the democratic and popular revolution. According to the defence doctrine of revolutionary Upper Volta, a conscious people cannot leave their homeland's defence to one group of men, however competent they may be. Conscious people take charge themselves of their homeland's defence. To this end, our armed forces constitute simply a detachment that is more specialised than the rest of the population for Upper Volta's internal and external security requirements. Similarly, even though the health of the voltaic people is the business of the people and of each individual voltaic, there exists, and will continue to exist, a more specialised medical corps that devotes more time to the question of public health. The revolution imposes 3 missions on the national armed forces. Number 1. To be capable of combating all internal and external enemies and to participate in the military training of the rest of the people. This presupposes an increased operational capacity, making each soldier a competent fighter, unlike the old army, which was merely a mass of employees. Number 2. To participate in national production. Indeed, the new soldier must live and suffer among the people to which he belongs. The days of the free-spending army are over. From now on, besides handling arms, the army will work in the fields and raise cattle, sheep and poultry. It will build schools and health clinics and ensure their functioning. It will maintain roads and will transport mail, the sick and agricultural products between regions by air. Number 3. To train each soldier as a revolutionary militant. Gone are the days when the army was declared to be neutral and apolitical, while in fact serving as a bastion of reaction and the guardian of imperialist interests. Gone are the days when our national army conducted itself like a corps of foreign mercenaries in conquered territory. Those days are gone forever. Armed with political and ideological training, our soldiers, non-commissioned officers, and officers engaged in the revolutionary process will no longer be potential criminals, but will instead become conscious revolutionaries, at home among the people like a fish in water. As an army at the service of the revolution, the National Popular Army will have no place for any soldier who looks down on, scorns, or brutalizes his people. An army of the people at the service of the people. Such is the new army we are building in place of the neocolonial army, which was utilised to rule over the people as a veritable instrument of oppression and repression in the hands of the reactionary bourgeoisie. Such an army, even in terms of its internal organisation and its principles of functioning, will be fundamentally different from the old army. Thus, instead of blind obedience of soldiers towards their officers, of subordinates towards their superiors, a healthy discipline will be developed that, while strict, will be based on its conscious acceptance by the men and the troops. Contrary to the opinions of reactionary officers fostered by a colonial attitude, the politicization of the army, its revolutionization, does not signal the end of discipline. Discipline in a politicized army will have a new content. It will be a revolutionary discipline. That is, a discipline that derives its strength from the fact that the human dignity of the officer and the soldier, of the commissioned and non-commissioned personnel, is worth the same, and that they differ from one another only with regard to their concrete tasks and respective responsibilities. Armed with this understanding of the relations between men, military cadres must respect their men, love them, and treat them as equals. Here too, the Committee for the Defence of the Revolution have a fundamental role to play. CDR militants within the army must be tireless pioneers in building the National Popular Army of the democratic and popular state, whose essential tasks will internally be to defend the rights and interests of the people, maintain revolutionary order, and safeguard democratic and popular power. Its task externally will be to defend our territorial integrity. Number 2. The Voltaic woman, her role in the democratic and popular revolution. The weight of age-old traditions in our society has relegated women to the rank of beasts of burden. Women suffer doubly from all the scourges of neocolonial society. First, they experience the same suffering as men. Second, they are subjected to additional suffering by men. Our revolution is in the interests of all the oppressed and all those who are exploited in today's society. It is therefore in the interests of women, since the basis of their domination by men lies in the system through which society's political and economic life is organised. By changing the social order that oppresses women, the revolution creates the conditions for their genuine emancipation. The women and men of our society are all victims of imperialist oppression and domination. That is why they wage the same battle. The revolution and women's liberation go together. We do not talk of women's emancipation as an act of charity or out of a surge of human compassion. It is a basic necessity for the revolution to triumph. Women hold up the other half of the sky. Forging a new mentality among voltaic women that allows them to take responsibility for the country's destiny alongside men is one of the essential tasks of the revolution. The same is true of the transformation to be made in men's attitudes towards women. Until now, women have been excluded from the realm of decision-making. The revolution, by entrusting women with responsibilities, is creating the conditions for unleashing women's fighting initiative. As part of its revolutionary policy, the CNR will work to mobilise, organise and unite all the dynamic forces of the nation, and women will not be left behind. They will be involved in all the battles we will have to wage against the various shackles of neocolonial society in order to build a new society. They will be involved at all levels in conceiving projects, making decisions and implementing them, in organising the life of the nation as a whole. The final goal of this great undertaking is to build a free and prosperous society in which women will be equal to men in all spheres. However, we must have a correct understanding of the question of women's emancipation. It is not a mechanical equality between men and women acquiring habits recognised as male, drinking, smoking and wearing pants. That's not the emancipation of women. Nor will acquiring diplomas make women equal to men or more emancipated. A diploma is not a free pass to emancipation. The genuine emancipation of women is one that entrusts responsibilities to women, that involves them in productive activity and in the different fights that people face. The genuine emancipation of women is one that compels men to give their respect and consideration. Emancipation, like freedom, is not granted, it is conquered. It is for women themselves to put forward their demands and mobilise to win them. For that, the democratic and popular revolution will create the necessary conditions to allow voltaic women to achieve total and complete fulfilment. For could it be possible to eliminate the system of exploitation while maintaining the exploitation of women who make up more than half of our society? Number 3. The national economy, independent, self-sufficient and planned at the service of a democratic and popular society. The process of revolutionary transformations undertaken since August the 4th places major democratic and popular reforms on the agenda. The National Council of the Revolution is therefore aware that the national construction of an independent, self-sufficient and planned national economy requires the radical transformation of present society, a transformation that itself requires the following major reforms: agrarian reform, administrative reform, educational reform, reform of the structures of production and distribution in the modern sector. The agrarian reform will aim to increase labour productivity through better organisation of the peasants and the introduction of modern agricultural techniques in the countryside. Develop a diversified agriculture together with regional specialisation. Abolish all the fetters that are part of the traditional socio-economic structures that oppress the peasants. Finally, make agriculture the basis for the development of industry. All this is possible by giving real meaning to the slogan of food self-sufficiency, a slogan that now seems dated for having been proclaimed so often without conviction. First, this will be a bitter struggle against nature, which, by the way, is no more thankless for us than for other peoples who have conquered it magnificently on the agricultural level. The CNR will harbour no illusions in gigantic, sophisticated projects. To the contrary, numerous small accomplishments in the agricultural system will allow us to transform our territory into one vast field, an endless series of farms. Second, this will be a struggle against those who starve the people, the agricultural speculators and capitalists of all types. Finally, it will mean protecting our agriculture against domination by imperialism, with regards to its origination, the plunder of our resources, and unfair competition from imports against our local products, imports whose only advantage is their packaging aimed at bourgeois afflicted with snobbishness. As for the peasants, sufficiently high prices and industrial food processing facilities will guarantee them markets for their produce in any season. The administrative reform aims to make operational the administration inherited from colonialism. To do that, it must be rid of all the evils that characterize it, namely the unwieldy and nitpicking bureaucracy and its consequences, and a complete revamping of the civil service statutes must be undertaken. The reform should result in a less costly, more effective, and more flexible administration. The educational reform aims to promote a new orientation for education and culture. It should result in transforming the schools into instruments at the service of the revolution. Graduates of the system should not serve their own interests and the exploiting classes, but rather the popular masses. The revolutionary education that will be taught in new schools must imbue everyone with a voltaic ideology, a voltaic personality that rids the individual of blind mimicry. One of the jobs of education in a democratic and popular society will be to teach students to assimilate the ideas and experiences of other peoples in a critical and positive manner. To end illiteracy and obscurantism, emphasis will have to be placed on mobilizing all energies with the idea of organizing the masses to increase their awareness and induce in them a thirst for knowledge by showing them the drawbacks of ignorance. Any policy of fighting illiteracy without the participation of those most concerned is doomed to failure. Culture in a democratic and popular society should have a threefold character: national, revolutionary, and popular. Everything that is anti-national, anti-revolutionary, and anti-popular must be banished. To the contrary, our culture extols dignity, courage, nationalism, and the great human virtues. The democratic and popular revolution will create favourable conditions for the blossoming of a new culture. Our artists will have a free hand to boldly go forward. They should seize the opportunity before them to raise our culture to a world level. Let writers put their pens at the service of our revolution. Let musicians sing not only of our people's glorious past, but also of their radiant and promising future. The revolution expects our artists to be able to describe reality, portray it in living images, and express them in melodious tunes, while showing our people the true way forward to a better future. It expects them to place the creative genius at the service of a national, revolutionary, and popular voltaic culture. We must be able to draw on what is positive from the past, that is, from our traditions, and what is positive in foreign cultures, in order to give a new dimension to our culture. The inexhaustible sources for the masses' creative inspiration lies within the popular masses. Knowing how to live with the masses, becoming involved in the popular movement, sharing the joys and sufferings of the people, and working and struggling with them, all these should be the major concerns of our artists. Before producing, they should ask themselves, for whom is our creation intended? If we are convinced that we are creating for the people, then we must understand clearly who the people are, what their different components are, and what their deepest aspirations are. The reform of our economy's structures of production and distribution seek to increasingly establish effective control by the voltaic people over the channels of production and distribution. For without genuine control over these channels, it is practically impossible to build an independent economy at the service of the people. People of Upper Volta, comrade militants of the revolution, the needs of our people are immense. Satisfaction of these needs requires that revolutionary transformations be undertaken in all fields. In the field of healthcare and social assistance for the popular masses, the goals to be achieved can be summed up as follows. Making healthcare available to everyone. Setting up maternal and infant assistance and care. A policy of immunization against communicable diseases by increasing the number of vaccination campaigns. Raising the masses' awareness of the need to acquire good habits of hygiene. All these goals can be attained only with the conscious involvement of the popular masses themselves in this fight, under the revolutionary guidance of the health services. In the field of housing, a field of crucial importance, we must undertake a vigorous policy to end real estate speculation and the exploitation of workers through rent gouging. Important measures in this field must be taken. Setting reasonable rents. Rapidly dividing neighbourhoods into lots. Undertaking large-scale construction of modern residential homes in sufficient numbers and accessible for workers. One of the CNR's essential concerns is to unite the different nationalities that exist in Upper Volta in the common struggle against our revolution's enemies. There are indeed in our country a multitude of ethnic groups that differ from each other in language and customs. The Voltaic nation consists of the totality of these nationalities. Imperialism, through its policy of divide and rule, strove to exacerbate the contradictions among them, to set one against the other. The CNR's policy aims to unite these different nationalities so that they live on an equal basis and enjoy equal opportunities for success. To do that, special emphasis will be placed on promoting economic development of the different regions, encouraging economic exchanges between them, combating prejudices between the ethnic groups, resolving in a spirit of unity the differences that divide them, punishing those who foment divisions. In view of all of the problems that our country faces, the revolutionary can be described as a challenge that we must rise to. We do so driven by the will to victory and together with the active participation of the popular masses mobilised through the CDRs. In the near future, with the elaboration of programmes for the various sectors, the entire territory of Upper Volta will be one vast construction site. The participation of all Voltaics able and old enough to work will be needed in the ruthless fight we will be waging to transform this country into a prosperous and radiant country, a country where the people will be the only masters of the nation's material and spiritual wealth. Finally, we must define the place of the Voltaic revolution in the world revolutionary process. Our revolution is an integral part of the world movement for peace and democracy, against imperialism and all forms of hegemonism. That is why we will strive to establish diplomatic relations with other countries, regardless of their political and economic systems, on the basis of the following principles. Respect for each other's independence, territorial integrity and national sovereignty. Mutual non-aggression. Non-interference in domestic affairs. Trade with all countries on an equal footing and on the basis of mutual benefit. We will give active solidarity and support to national liberation movements fighting for the independence of their countries and the liberation of their peoples. This support is directed in particular to the Namibian people under the leadership of SWAPO, to the Sahrawi people in their struggle to recover their national territory, to the Palestinian people for their national rights. Objectively, the anti-imperialist African countries are allies in our struggle. The neocolonial alliances operating on our continent make closer ties with these countries necessary. Long live the democratic and popular revolution. Long live the National Council of the Revolution. Homeland or death, we will win. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed that, be sure to leave a like, and if you want to hear more politics and philosophy, be sure to subscribe.